Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the 50th Fireside Chat. That means there's over 150 hours of your questions and Tom's answers that everyone appreciates so much, and that's due to Oliver's server and Justin's editing and sound work. So thank you again to both of you. Let's get started today with a new guest we have from Brazil. Celso has a question for you, Tom.
Hi. Hello, Tom. Nice to meet you, finally.
Yeah. Hi, Celso. Thanks for all the work. Thanks for all the work that you did helping Mario translate MBT for the Brazilian Portuguese audience.
Yes. Actually, it's I that must thank to you, Tom, for all your work, and it's just a little part of it all. Okay, so my question is about. Sorry, I wrote it down. It's a little long, so I have to write it down so not to forget. So I'll read it. I think it's better if I read. Okay, so let's begin. Have you ever thought, Tom, in explaining the simulation theory or computational reality theory based upon the effects of the gravitational time dilation? Let me explain. A little disclaimer first. I'm not a physicist, so please forgive me if I say something really stupid. In computational models or simulation, one has two options when dealing with objects that interact with each other. One giant code loop through all the instance which calculates all values and different object reactions until the object counter it's over, so it can back to the beginning and start the iteration over again. So we have one tick of that simulation, one tick of the time has passed. And the other option is separated instance of objects which contain in themselves a smaller part of the code that solves the interaction they need to compute their next state, running in different spaces of memory and processing. In other words, one thread by object, one independent time tick for each object. Taking the assumption that our universe is simulated and it's so huge in quantity, in object quantity, that the second option seems to make sense when you have to deal with an almost infinite amount of object instances. If each object instance has its own clock, each independent loop through the rule set, the relative time that the object will utterly depend on how many objects it's interacting with in a given delta time. That said, let's suppose our reality is simulated. I think we should not suppose this, but anyway. And what is computed deals only with the particles that are in fact only independent object instance. Each has its own thread and everything else emerges from that. What would happen to the particle or the probability of the particle that must deal with a huge number of other particles and they are in fact compared to particles that has a fewer number of particles to deal with due to the fact they are in different space locations. But explaining, a particle or a set of particles surrounding a small asteroid would have less interactions to compute than the same amount of particles surrounding a planet or a black hole, and so on. And the distance of that huge amount of objects to interact with implies directly how fast or slow that object computes its next stage. That's exactly what happens in gravitational time dilation effect, which is widely proven and tested by so many years. So do you think that this logic to be used to explain the simulation theory in the macro perspective, not having just to count only on quantum strangeness to support our computational universe? Sorry, it's really confusing. That's
okay.
it.
Yeah, I follow that reasonably well. let's back up to the biggest picture to begin with, and that is we have the LCS, and of course the LCS, the big computer, individual units of consciousness, the simulation that they're in. These are all metaphors for things. Okay, these are not necessarily, you think of them as things in and of themselves. These are metaphors that we make up to describe things and to describe the interaction of things and the connections between things. So that's kind of, keep that in mind. There are some things like time dilation and length contraction that are in special relativity that are just an artifact of the fact that speed of light's a constant. And the speed of light being a constant is just an artifact of the fact that it's a digital computed reality. Okay, if you have a virtual reality, then any virtual reality will have a maximum speed, which is 1 pixel per unit time. Now, what you're talking about is talking about the kind of the density of computations required. Okay, and if the density of computations goes up so that you need a whole lot more computations per unit time, okay, then there is some idea that slows the process down. Okay, that's going to make the process run slower because it requires more processing. Well, that depends on how fast the computer is and what, how much more time does it take to do a lot of them, and is that extra time really meaningful? You see, you could have, let's say you are typing and you type just with one finger, and that's maybe 5 words per minute. All right, that doesn't tax the processor very much. That processor has a lot of idle time. But then let's say you do something, 100 times faster. Or at least let's make it more reasonable if you went 5. Let's say you do it, 12 times faster. 5 12s are 60. That's 60 words per minute. Well, that's 5 times more processing, but still it doesn't make any difference because the computer's fast enough that extra 5 times your typing speed just doesn't make any real difference because it can still do it fast enough that it doesn't create any problems. You see? So then if we can imagine making it 1,000 or 10,000 times faster, then, how fast do you have to type? Now I'm just talking about metaphorically typing. Obviously people can't type 1,000 times faster, but how faster do you have to type before the delay time in your typing starts to cause problems in the processing? Well, eventually you'll get to a point that the computer isn't quite able to keep up with you. It gets bogged down, and then it makes a problem. But up until that point, there may be a huge range where it really just doesn't matter whether it's 5 or 60 or 1,000 or 10,000. The computer can keep up with that without even trying hard. You see, so it just depends. To posit this idea that that gravity is tied to a density of computation. The idea that when things get in a gravitational field, a strong gravitational field, then time goes slower, right? That's a time dilation because of gravity. And that this effect has to do with the fact that there's more processing. Well, there's some assumptions in there, rather big assumptions, and that's that, yes, there is going to be more processing, that's clear, but does it really make a difference? Is it really squeezing the system? And then we have to go look at the idea of this is not just a deterministic system that has to calculate all the details. This is a statistical system. Okay, it's a probabilistic based system. It doesn't have to compute all the details. Matter of fact, if there's those particles circling an asteroid out there, if nobody's looking at that asteroid or those particles, it doesn't have to compute anything. Nobody's asking for the information, so there is no computation going on there. If you look at it for just a few minutes or for an hour, then it has to do those computations during that hour, but then it doesn't have to do them anymore. you see, unless somebody looks at it again. So things like that, where you don't have to do computations, you basically just do statistics. So what happens when you look at it and then the next day you look at it again? Does it actually have to do all those computations so that when you look at it again, it'll be in exactly that precise state that it would be in if you continued everything that you saw the day before? You see, no, it doesn't have to do that. It only has to produce a reality within the needs of the players. So if a player looks at it a day later and they couldn't really tell whether every detailed atomic and molecular level process has been done properly, until the next day, then the system doesn't have to compute any of that. All it has to do is produce something on that second day that the scientists look at it that is probably about what it would be. You see, it's moved about the right distance, it's still got particles there, but it doesn't have to precisely compute it because the scientists looking at it haven't precisely computed it. Therefore, that information isn't necessary. So you see, there's a lot of efficiency that this system can have because it's a probabilistic system. It doesn't have to compute everything. It can just do some statistics. A day later, it can throw out can take a couple of random number, and produce an event that is good enough. It's not necessarily perfectly what would have been there if it had done it deterministically, but it's close enough that nobody notices. And it saves the system lots and lots and lots of processing. So that's the way the whole world works. The whole, even down on our day-to-day level, for things that we don't keep track of, for things that have uncertainty in them, then the system does not have to compute those to any degree that's more precise than that uncertainty. You see? So when those scientists really look at that asteroid and those particles, it only has to reproduce something that is credible within the uncertainty of where all those particles might be. Well, the scientists know about how fast the asteroid was going and about where it's going to be, so it has to put it in about the right place. But if it's a centimeter, to the right or to the left, or maybe a mile, further, it doesn't make any difference because all that's in the noise. It makes no difference whatsoever. So it just starts something up that kind of looks right, and we go on with that. So the system saves lots and lots of processing by using statistics where processes have uncertainty. And then that makes all the difference in the world. It's only when you start from the assumption of a deterministic process where it has to process everything as it goes all the time, do you get stuck in this processing problem of, calculations that you make this association between the calculation density and, say, the slowing down of time. I don't think that time slows down because the system is bogged down. I don't think that's the reason why you get time dilation in the presence of a large mass. I just say it's just part of the rule set. So, that's easy to say. That's kind of a cop-out. It's just part of the rule set. But, the rule set is also a metaphor. It's the way we have to look at things. It's our way of structuring the problem so that we can talk about it. So I don't think that's the case. And the reason I think that's not the case is that whether or not a computer is stressed in its processing, whether it needs to process faster than it really can, it's getting into the place that it's getting bogged down because of the processing demand, that comes and goes. It depends on what else is going on. It's not always going to be consistent. One day, it may be able to process 1,000 times faster on a particular thing than it could the day before, because in the day before, it had a lot of other things going on at the same time that aren't going on today. You see? So in that case, they'd find this time dilation wouldn't be consistent. Sometimes it would be very small, and sometimes it would be much bigger, depending on what the system was doing and whether the system happened to be bogged down or not. And thinking that the system always bogs down in exactly the same way, all the time, particularly when this is a probabilistic system, just doesn't make sense to me. So I've heard that argument before. It makes some it makes some sense in a way of trying to show that the time dilation near a big mass, which has been measured, that is a fact, that exists because of the fact that it's a simulation and it's a calculation issue. But I'm not real convinced that that's a real good argument. I just have a few issues with it, so I don't think so. But the fact that that's the case is true, and that means that it's obviously part of the rule set. Now, exactly what part of the rule set it is and why it needs to be that way, and tracing that back to something in the digital world, I don't know. It could just be part of the rule set, and there's nothing more to it than that. Look at all the fundamental things in physics. We don't know where they come from. We don't really know what they are. All the fundamental things. We don't know where time comes from. We don't know where mass comes from. We don't know where, what spin really is. We call it spin, but that's just a metaphor. It's not really something spinning, it's not a physical thing spinning. That's just what we call it because it has angular momentum, and that sounds like spin would be a good metaphor for it. So, we have all these things. Space. Where does space come from? And everything else in physics is computed from these basic things in physics: time, space, mass, spin. I've probably left some of them out, but the basic things. Everything else is calculated from them. Yet we have no idea where those things come from. They're just part of the rule set. You have to have a rule set that works and deals with these quantities. So you make up this rule set that then begins the simulation. You may tweak the rule set up. So, as you evolve the simulation until you finally get something that's stable in the long term. But saying it's just part of the rule set, though that sounds like a cop-out, it may just be just part of the rule set. It was needed to be there in order for the whole system to be stable the way it is. So it just became part of the rule set. So that's not a very satisfying answer, but I'm not real convinced that the analog between computational density and the slowdown of time near a large mass is really the way it is. There's some good arguments there. I've heard the arguments, but I'm not too convinced yet that that's really a fact and not just something that seems to correlate some, but a lot of things correlate some without really being causal. A lot of things that have correlations that aren't causal. So I kind of put it in that basket. In other words, to sum that up, I'd say, well, I just don't know. I'm open-minded, but I'm skeptical.
Thanks, Tom. I think you're right. Maybe I'm just, as I say, I'm not a physicist. I just had this strange idea. Just what I thought is about not just to justify the gravitational effect or anything like this, but just when you have to relate objects that are distant from each other, let's say some 2 light years from distance, that or even our satellites around the Earth that has to we have to adjust their clocks because they are further from our planet. And I just thought about that would be a good assumption. But you're right. You said that in a statistical basis, if you don't have to calculate all the granular resolution of everything, it really doesn't really matter. Okay, exactly. I think you're just right. I got it. Thanks. Anyway, thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
You're right.
Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us. Cheryl, please go ahead with your questions.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Cheryl.
So good to see you again on the screen. I love your work related to the book that you haven't written yet. I even went to the website and read the outline that you have there, and it was brilliant. So as I started doing my fear, ego, anger, / primal woman work, I was shocked to find out I was not who I thought I was. It was even more shocking to my family. I mean, what do you say? I'm an alien imposter. I'm trying to grow up and become a loving being as you're standing there. I'm having a bad day. How can we help our family as we stop being who we think we should be and start being more honest? I just thought some tips for helping family members cope during this time would be really helpful. After the initial shock of it all, my family did adjust, and they do like the real, much more honest Cheryl, much better. Everyone around me is much happier now since I started being more vulnerable and more honest. And they feel like they can be more honest and vulnerable too. It feels like we're living a real life now instead of playing a part in a movie script. Just such a huge change for the better. I just thought it would be helpful, for others and me too, how to help your family when the real you starts coming out and they don't know who that is really.
Okay, you make a really good point, Cheryl. As you grow up and get rid of your ego, you are still, and get rid of your fears and become an authentic being. You are still surrounded by people who haven't gone through that process. And here you're going through the process, and the people you work with, the people in your family, all the people you associate with don't even know the process exists, much less, are ready to go through it. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with being kind of the odd one out, that you don't really fit in and you've changed and your friends and family and coworkers are wondering, what's going on? Well, what you have to do is be aware of where all these other people are, your family and your friends, your coworkers. What does the world look like from their viewpoint? In other words, think about their reality and think about how they see you in their reality. Now, they were used to working with basically an image, your image, the way you presented yourself, and you were presenting yourself in the way that you thought they needed you to present yourself. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about, what is that doing to them? How that kind of cuts them loose in the sense they don't really know what to do with you now. They don't really know how to interact with you because you're acting differently. You're responding differently to the things that they're saying. Well, if you're aware of that, then you can control how much, how fast of the changes that you are going through do you need to show to them? You see? So it's not just a matter of, okay, I'm going through these changes and here I am, I'm a new person, and the rest of the world, you just need to deal with it, because I am now authentic and you just have to deal with me the way I am. Suck it up, cupcake, It's a new world today and here I am. That's kind of harsh for them. You see, that's still all about you being what you want and not really caring too much about the impacts you have on other people. So what you have to do in this process is be aware of the impacts you do have on other people, that they take a little time to turn that corner. They kind of have to understand, and you need to talk with them, and you can't lay too much change on them too quickly because people are terrified of change. They don't like change, and when they see change, they get worried, they get upset, they're wondering what's wrong. My gosh, Cheryl, what happened? Are you possessed by somebody? You're not yourself anymore, You have to just give them enough change that to help them take a step in a direction of accepting that and interact with them in a very caring, loving way, and slowly let them grow to interact with the real you as opposed to the image you that they used to interact with. You can talk with them. You can explain it to them. Some people, you can't explain it to them. You try to explain it to them and they just won't listen. It doesn't compute. They won't hear you. Well, then you have to do it other ways. You just have to show them a little bit of the new way and then just let them get used to that, then show them a little bit more and let them get used to that and take it a little step further. So it's just a matter of being sensitive to other people and not just having it all about you being authentic. You being authentic is great, but sometimes you have to be, kind of live in two worlds at the same time. You have to live in your own world where now you're becoming a very authentic person, but you also are a player in the worlds of these other people. Mm-hmm. And you need to respect these other people for wherever they are, wherever their viewpoint is, however much ego they have, however much fear is pushing them and pulling them. Mm-hmm. That is the way they are. And you just have to give them respect that that's where they are on their path at this time. They're doing the best they can. They're struggling with it, and try to make that transition as gently as possible for them. And some people won't make the transition, period. They just will refuse, and they will pull away from you. And maybe that's just, that relationship isn't going to work very well anymore. Well, you can still be nice to them and still be kind to them and still give them a hug every once in a while and be friendly. But you may realize that relationship now will always just be superficial. Yes. Because it's just not able to become a deeper relationship because they just can't get out of the belief system that they're in. And that can be sad, particularly if that's somebody that's close to you. That can be very sad, but you just have to accept that's the way it is. You can't force people to grow up, but you still have to care for them and respect them the way they are. So it's a tricky process. It just needs to happen slowly, and sometimes it doesn't work at all, and you have to accept that too, because you can't make it work. And there's no sense, trying to make something happen that just isn't going to happen. You can keep working at it a little bit, but only gently. And it always works better. People are more able to accept change when they feel safe. When they feel that everything's okay, they can accept change. When they feel threatened, like there's something wrong here, and they're kind of circling the wagons and, looking for the trouble, and they get they're tense and they're uptight about it. They don't change in that mode. When they're in that mode, they're unchangeable. When they feel safe, when they feel secure, and they feel like everything's going to be all right, then they can change. So then it's up to you to try to put them in that space where they feel safe and that everything's going to be okay. And then you can work on changing them. But as long as if you're trying to force the issue and force them to see it, this is the way I am, damn it, deal with me, then that's not going to work very well. That's going to take a longer time, and it's going to create problems as you go. So that's about the best general advice I could give you about dealing with things like that. And almost everybody who grows up more than the people around them has these same issues. You have family, you have friends, you have spouses, you have coworkers, and they just don't understand who you are and where you're coming from. And you just have to live with that and accept that and respect that they're doing the best they can with what they've got, and there's no sense slapping them or trying to force them. You just have to work with them. And eventually you feel kind of compassion for them. And when you feel that compassion, you care for them. And when they feel you caring for them, that makes them safe. And then when they feel safe, they can make changes. So it all kind of works in that way.
One of the things that I was really, when I was being more authentic and like something would pull up something, it's like, oh, I'm feeling this because of this. It's one of my fears. Let me go in here and think about it, right? Instead of getting mad. That was my go-to. If a fear would come up, well, if I got mad at it, then it would go away, right? Well, it wasn't working out for me or anybody else. And so as I started working on the anger and getting that under control, and started being more honest about, oh, I'm feeling this way and I'm dealing with the fear. Let me go in here. And that was the part that I felt really bad about for my family, because they're going, what's wrong with you? But then I realized, they're not dealing with an angry woman in their house. So that, help out there anyway. Yeah. So I was just trying to get my fears and stuff worked on. I wasn't trying to change anybody because I couldn't. I needed to change me first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But you have to always be aware how you affect other people and take
Yes.
that into consideration.
Yes. Some of it, what was strange to me was some of the family members that I thought I was really close to, it became like a very superficial relationship, like you said. But then other people in my family that I didn't feel as close to, we've become extremely close. So I thought that was just really odd. But I think it's just because of the changes, you know. And
Yep.
and you just can't be mean to them. You just have to be nice and love them. But it does make you sad when that happens.
Yeah.
Not for very long. You can just feel it and move on if you want to.
Good.
Okay. Are you done?
Done.
Okay. Next question. Do I get two? Do we have time for two?
Sure. Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. When I was young, this is a little embarrassing, but when I was young, I was not a well-defined feminine female. So at Christmas, I would write a letter to Santa, and every year I would get the most extreme feminine toys on the market. I did not know I was bumping up against a taboo. I just thought Santa was a big red jerk. I just wanted roller skates instead of earrings and frilly dresses. This repeated Christmas trauma made me feel really bad feelings every Christmas. And over time, I have to say this. I just thought it was really interesting that when I went to the immersive that you became Santa there. And it was almost like you've got a lot of fears around this you need to work on. Anyway, back to the question. So I felt bad every Christmas until I figured out that Santa wasn't this big red jerk, that it was other people that were being the jerk. And this repeated Christmas thing, the bad feelings every Christmas, and over time it seems that these feelings have created Christmas demons. Isn't it true that intense negative feelings can create a sort of energy form that now has a life of its own? I've worked very hard at getting rid of the fears around this. I have even spoken to a counselor about what I could do to help this. And even she agreed with me. Oh, this is bad, Cheryl. I read the Seth books, and Christmas Demons comes the closest to explaining what I'm dealing with every Christmas. I have no other demons, just this one. Do you have any ideas on how to trap this thing like on Ghostbusters?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about that. Yes, if you have constant negative feelings, negative attitudes, and basically if you have fears, those fears can build and grow to the point that they create a demon for yourself. It's basically the fear creates a thought form within your mind that exists as an entity there, and then we can call that a demon. Again, a metaphor, a metaphorical demon, which is something that seems to pester you and not leave you alone and create problem, and you want it to go away, but it doesn't. The demon is just the symbol, the metaphor for your fear. It's just your fear. You're feeling inadequate. You're feeling like you're not doing it right, or other people think you're not doing it right. And you get this stress. You're getting all the little girl toys, and there's somebody trying to encourage you to be something that you're not, and it doesn't feel right. And because it doesn't feel right, you resent the being pushed. You resent the poke and the push, trying to push you into something that you're not. So that resentment then builds, and you can create a demon for yourself. To get rid of it, you have to get rid of the fear. Okay, you have to let it go. You have to look at the whole thing and accept it. It is just the way it is. People are the way they are. They will do things like that, try to manipulate you and try to push you into ways that they think you ought to be. And you have to accept that. For the most part, they're not being evil, trying to give you demons. They're actually trying to be helpful from their viewpoint and their reality. They're trying to be helpful. And And you just have to realize that and then just let it go. Say, it is what it is. I don't have to fight with that. But the struggle is, if you feel inadequate, if you feel that you're not doing it right, if you have this sense of failure and you worry about what other people think of you, failure in their eyes or failure in your own eyes, then that's the problem. But that's not something that they're doing to you. That's something you're doing to yourself. So you have the ability to let that demon just go by accepting the things that are the way they are, people are the way they are, and not feeling negative about yourself or being inadequate. Just say, it is the way it is. I accept it. That's me. I'm okay with it. If other people have a problem with it, then they'll have to struggle with that. I'll try to be as nice and make it as gentle for them as possible, but I'm not going to not be me. I am going to be me, and I'll do that with a caring for others. And that will then let the demons go. So the only thing you can do is get rid of the fear. And that fear that makes you feel bad is a fear inside of you, not really something they're doing to you. And the demon is your own creation, an embodiment of that fear. Just dismantle it. Comes around the next Christmas, just expect it. Say, okay, I'm going to have this issue. Now I'm just not going to let it make my choices for me. I'm not going to let it change my mood. I'm not going to let it get me down. I'm just going to set it aside and not be bothered with it. And if you have a real strong intent for that, as you know, you can get rid of those fears. You've made a lot of progress getting rid of fears, and this is just another fear.
It's probably one of my biggest ones. That may be why it feels like a demon. Yeah. But I've been working on it specifically for the last 3 years. It is shortening in time. It's just still so intense that it's just like a waterfall that comes and sweeps me off my feet. Next thing I know, I'm trying to, go walk 5 miles so that I don't have to feel or do something because it's just a big one. And I know that this happens to a lot of people that are like. It does.
Yeah, the big ones take time. They're not quick. You may be working on this for some years, but as long as you keep working on it, you will succeed and it will go away.
It just may take a few years.
Yes.
Those darn Christmas demons. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love you too.
I love you too, Cheryl. You're a wonderful person.
Aw, thank you. Vice versa.
Thank you, Cheryl. Frank, if you'd like to go ahead with your questions.
Yes. Hi, Donna, and hi, Tom. Thank you very much. And with regard to what Cheryl just said, let me also thank you again for the UK Immersive. That was really wonderful to be there with you and spend so much time with you and all those other wonderful people. And it was really a few days where I didn't feel the odd one out, so I can very well relate to what Cheryl just said, and so I got very much out of the immersive, not least thanks to that, being together with so many like-minded people. So that was an amazing experience. I've got 2 sets of questions, so some sub-questions to each topic, and the first one is about the constant stream of thoughts that I and probably most other people usually have in our heads. And that, of course, gets in the way of focusing one's intent. For example, when it's about reaching point consciousness and then trying to access NPMR. Tom, I think, if I understand correctly, you have said that the constant chatter in our minds is not caused by the avatar that we're playing, but by our low quality of consciousness. So about that, I have 3 related questions. So what is the reason actually that this constant chatter is going on in our minds? Is that just an expression of our fear? Because most of the thoughts that we get all the time are about regretting something we did in the past, and so it's about guilt or the fear of not being good enough, or it's planning for the future. And I think that's linked to the fear of uncertainty and the fear of wanting to prepare the best for everything. So is that just an expression of our fear, or is there some other mechanism going on? And So I don't know if you would like to comment on that first, or if I should.
Let's just do them one at a time. It doesn't tax my memory so much if we do it that way. Yes, it is an expression of fear. And we can say that another way. It's an expression of high entropy. High entropy is random. High entropy is scattered. High entropy is non-structured, non-focused. And that's the way a high entropy mind works. It jumps around from thing to thing. It's constantly analyzing, assessing, comparing. It's doing all these things just rather, I don't know, in no particular order, right? It's just high entropy. It's a high entropy consciousness, is not one that's focused and not one that's settled down. So yes, it's just the nature of a high entropy consciousness to be that way.
Okay, great. Actually, now that you're saying it, it sounds so logical, but I never made this link between high entropy in the sense of no structure, but it makes total sense. So, well, then my speculation was, that was my second question, whether, is this so there's not a purpose to keep us immersed in this PMR reality, so that to make sure that only those that are grown up enough, so fearless enough, can easily access NPMR. So there's not really a purpose. It's just, as you just said, it's just the reason that we have so much fear and are so high.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Right.
And so from that, I would then conclude that, well, you lower your entropy, and at some point, this whole chatter just subsides. It just goes away. I've heard reports of people who said they had some sort of awakening experience, and then that chatter stopped almost entirely. But for people, this seems to be, at least the reports I've read about, this seems to be something that happens, in all at once. So it's the way I understood it from others. It's not like it just goes down slowly over years, but some people have just that from one day to the next they had some sort of awakening experience and then it was gone. So I wonder what that might trigger.
Yeah. Okay, that happens in the margins. It is more typical that the noisy mind gets less and less noisy slowly over time. That's the typical experience. And typically the tool that one uses is meditation. Meditation is a tool where you specifically focus on keeping your mind clear of thoughts. That's your job in meditation, is to keep your mind clear of thoughts. And as thoughts come in, you just gently set them aside and go back to your mantra or your breathing or whatever it is you're using as a meditation technique. Mostly it's a slow process, but it starts out to be very difficult. And then as you make progress, it gets easier and easier. And eventually you live in a lower entropy space. You live in with a mind that is more focused and more under control. And it makes everything in your life better because you're not so scattered and your energy's not so scattered. Everything works better. You're better at work and you're better at home when you can get rid of all that noise. But occasionally it happens dramatically, where it just is there and then one day it's gone. Well, that is typically a person who has been gaining on the process, has been learning, has been growing up, working on this for a while, and then they get to some aha moment, some major change in the way they see reality, and suddenly they see everything differently. And that happens then suddenly. But it doesn't typically happen to people just out of the blue who haven't been working on it, aren't interested. They're just walking down a street, something hits them on the head, and after that, their mind is perfectly clear. That would be rarer than rare. Those cases that happen suddenly are because the person is really getting close to being ready for that. And then there's just some little thing that triggers it and makes it all fall together. Often our understanding is that way. We work and work and work on trying to understand something, and then we get an epiphany, and it all falls together, and all the pieces of the puzzle, suddenly we know how to fit them together, and we get a solution that happens rather quickly, even though we've been working on that particular puzzle, for maybe years. So that does happen occasionally, but it's not the main way. The main way is slowly, just by working at it.
I was on 2 week-long meditation retreats, and there I noticed that after a few days, actually also my own mind became much calmer, and the stream of thoughts almost came to a hold. But can I conclude from that I was really low entropy at the time? I mean, I don't think so. Maybe I just managed to override my otherwise higher entropy. It's not that if after the end of the meditation week I would have died, then this would have been a maximum use of my life, and I would have really lowered my IUOC's entropy.
No, it's not like that. You're right. It's not that you were a low entropy being and you somehow advanced, a great step spiritually, and then you went back. It's not that way. Learning to quiet your mind is a skill that anybody can learn. It's a skill that is, that you can do that even if you're somewhat of a high entropy being. You can learn to quiet your mind. So it's not, that just takes practice. It takes practice so that your mind isn't jumping around all the time. That doesn't mean that you're lower or higher entropy, but it does mean that once you quiet your mind, that now taking the next step toward becoming a low entropy being is a whole lot easier. Because until you get rid of all that noise, then it's kind of difficult to grow yourself if you're constantly flying around in 10 different directions at once. That makes it hard to grow. So it's a step that's required for growth, but it doesn't automatically make you grow up.
Thank you. I'd have a second set of questions that's somehow related, but I'd be happy to let others go first and then come back in later if that's okay.
That's okay, or you can ask them now.
Okay, well, since they're related, so I during the UK Immersive, somebody asked a question about Kundalini Awakening. So I wasn't very familiar with that, but I think you said something that intrigued me, because I think you said during that process that there is really an upgrade of the avatar, I think, if I got that right. So I just wondered if you could elaborate a bit on what this upgrade of the avatar, what it entails. Or did I not get that right?
No, you get that right. The mind leads, the body follows. The body has to support the mind. So if you are a person who, let's say, you complain a lot, you have a lot of fear, and so on, then you will end up creating, let's say, brain chemistry that supports that negative attitude. Okay, so your number of neurotransmitters, your serotonin levels will go down, because that then supports this kind of negative attitude and negative mindset you're in. And if you can get out of that negative mindset and get into a positive space, your neurotransmitters will increase. So you can change your brain chemistry with your intent. Your intent modifies the physical system. Okay, it can work in the opposite direction somewhat. The normal way it works is mind leads, body follows. But occasionally, if you can make a change in the body, that lets go of some constraints, just like being in a negative mood creates physical constraints, because now you have bad brain chemistry. You have a lack of neurotransmitters, therefore you have a hard time feeling happy and positive. That's depression. Has very low number of neurotransmitters. So you create this physical problem, and if you work out in the opposite direction, you give somebody some Prozac, which helps raise their serotonin, gives them more neurotransmitters because of a pill that they swallow, and that makes them happier. Okay, so things like Prozac are prescribed for people who are mildly depressed. It helps them feel better. Well, so you have them creating a condition that then medicine can help erase the physical condition that they've created, which makes it easier for them to feel better. But if they continue to be negative because they haven't solved any of their problems, then eventually that medicine isn't going to work very well for them, and they may they will overcome that too, and their body, even with the medicine, will be unable to produce enough neurotransmitters. and then they'll give them a different kind of medicine, and maybe that'll work for a little while until they learn, teach their body how to overcome that too, so that their body does indeed mirror the state of their mind, changes to support their mind. So you can, by changing the body, you can remove constraints. It can work in the opposite direction. That's not normal the way the process works, but it can work that way. So in the Kundalini process, if you get to a point where you are growing quickly, you've grown to a point that you need or you're ready for your body to make some changes to support your new growth. But it may be that those physical changes that need to take place will take place eventually over time. It may be 4 or 5 years. It may be a longer length of time that it'll take, and it'll be a very slow process. And such a slow process, you may not even notice it. But it's possible that the system can come and help speed that process up. It can come and make some modifications, if you will, in the physical system to the avatar that then gives the consciousness fewer constraints. And typically, that's the idea of the Kundalini. Now, Kundalini has a lot of, a lot of belief-based things and a lot of ritual and other stuff tied to it. It has to do with energy moving around and through the chakras and energizing the various chakras and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's all just metaphorical stuff. It's a way to describe this experience when people in a short period of time take a large step forward in their lowering their entropy. At least it seems that they take kind of a big step all at once. Well, that's just the system helping them get there a little sooner. They would get there anyway without it. It just may take them 3 or 4 years for the body to actually go through the changes. You don't change your body on a dime. When you change your number of neurotransmitters, you don't do that overnight. You do that over months or years. You have to be sullen and negative for years before it drags that, changes your brain physiology. So these are not fast things. So the system does help those people who are ready for a change to get through that physical process change a little more quickly than it would take otherwise without the system's help. And that's really what the Kundalini is about. It's not really taking them any place that they couldn't get on their own. It's just speeding up the process. So what it looks like from our viewpoint, it looks like somebody's just made a lot of growth all of a sudden. Well, not really. They've made the growth, and now they are getting rid of some of the constraints in their physical system that will allow them to express that more easily. So that's what's going on pretty much, and the chakras and the rest of it. That's just a metaphorical explanation of what's going on, and it's energy, and the energy circulates through the chakras. Well, if you have a chakra system as part of your belief, then you use that system to explain things, and they use that system to explain things. And the larger conscious system can also use that system to explain things to you, because that's part of the way you understand the world. Those are your metaphors. And if the system's trying to explain something to you, they'll explain it to you in terms of your own metaphors. Otherwise, you won't explain it. So the system itself may give images or data or whatever to support that chakra idea, because that's a system of metaphors that people understand and can use. So it helps the system to be able to communicate with those people.
So how would you describe the upgrade of the avatar? What happens to the physical body according to your set of metaphors? And so I guess the body would then have fewer constraints on the consciousness. And what would the consciousness afterwards be able to do that it wasn't able to do before?
Basically, what it does is it makes it easier for that person to exist at the being level and to connect with the information that is out in the consciousness system. So it can connect to the databases, it can connect to the LCS. Another metaphor for that is it can connect more readily with its guides. It's just another metaphor for the interface to the LCS. So it just finds the connection between PMR and NPMR to be more available and to be less effort and to be more natural. That is the step up that they feel. It makes that connection easier. Now, if what they do with that is another thing altogether. They could take that and let that be a source of ego for them. Oh, look, I got all of this, and I get this information, and I'm connected. Boy, aren't I grown up and wise and wonderful, much more than everybody else. And that could go and create a lot of ego, which would generate, which would be a representation of fear at a basic level, which could just run them right back down the hill that they had already, climbed up once. They may have to climb up that hill again. But so what they do with it just depends on the individual. Some can squander it. Some can make something of it. Some can use it to grow up with. It's up to the individual to make something useful out of it. It doesn't always have to be useful, and it doesn't always leave people in a better state. Sometimes people kind of push that process by focusing their intent on having this Kundalini experience. And they make that a strong intent of theirs. They're, in other words, they're pushing the system to help make that happen with their focused intent, modifying future probability. And if you push the system to that end, you may get what you wish or what you hope for before you're really ready for it, and before you're able to actually do much useful with it, and you might find it a terrifying process. And it may not be helpful at all. So it can be a benefit, it can be neutral, or it can be a detriment. It depends on the person and what they bring to it. It's better not to try to push that process, but to let it happen when and if you're ready for it. Then you have a good probability of being able to use it positively. If you think that that's somehow kind of a cheat, you're going to hack the system, you're going to get there without doing the work, you're going to force that process, and you're going to be better off because you're going to take a leap ahead. It doesn't work like that. You have to grow up by your choices. There's no leap ahead. And if you're not ready, even if you get that change in your system and you're not ready for it, it'll just as likely be a problem for you that will raise your entropy than it is something that will lower your entropy. So there is no leap ahead.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask one last thing to clarify? Because when you say there's an upgrade of the avatar, I still think, okay, there must be some physical change to the person's body that must somehow be detectable, or because if you say, okay, chakras and energy are just metaphors, but is there something that even according to your concepts and metaphors is comparable to a physical change of the body, something in the body?
Yeah.
Or
yeah, there is a physical change in the body. That is correct. But as you grow up, your body changes.
What is the change in the body?
Well, I don't know.
Changes?
I don't know what the physiological, if you had somebody did tests on you, I'm not sure exactly what they would find. Maybe they'd find that your body makes more DMT or something. I don't know what they might find. But as you grow up, as you evolve, your body constantly changes to support that. Constantly is changing. So your physiology changes according to how much where you are with your consciousness. So your consciousness grows up, your body changes to support it. As you get more and more caring and more empathetic, those parts of your brain that have to do with empathy and caring start to get bigger and have more synapses and more structure in them. You see, you just change. And it's not that the brain changes, which allows you to be more empathetic. It's that you become more empathetic because you're growing up, and that then causes the brain to change to support it. So these are physical changes. So there would be some physical change going on in the system that allows that easier interaction with NPMR, you see, but you have to earn it. You have to grow up to that point to use it. So if what you do is say, well, let's just take a guess, and I don't know whether this is correct, but let's just say that part of that is you get more neurotransmitters and your body makes more DMT. And that's maybe one of the things that happens. So this is just an example I made up. Well, if you take pills that give you more neurotransmitters and you take the drug DMT that gives you more DMT, then you may stimulate the body to that state. But if you haven't earned it through your choices and, in your own growth, it's not going to help you. It's just going to be an experience. It's going to be a trip. Okay, now you're connected. But what you're doing with that connection is still expressing the same fear, ego, and belief that you always had. You see, you haven't made the choices to get rid of that fear, ego, and belief. So now you get to express it in a bigger picture. That's not helpful. It's not really helpful to be inside a bigger picture than what you are able to deal with effectively. What it tends to do is make you feel superior. Oh, I'm ahead. I've got all these talents and skills, and I can remote view and heal, and I'm connected. And instead of lowering your entropy and increasing your quality, it does the opposite. You start to feel special, superior, lofty, high, that sort of thing, enlightened. You have all of these concepts of yourself that are just masking the fear and ego and belief that's always been there. So I think that means you're in a worse state. It's even harder for you to grow up now because you've got another set of beliefs that are just the opposite of what it takes to grow up. You feel like you're already there. So that's the problem. If you could go in and make these changes happen, you're not going to grow up because of it. Growing up only comes from making good choices. Doesn't come from taking a drug or changing the body. But the body will change in response to your growing up. It makes physical changes. So I hope does that get the answer to your question?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.